thank you. Yeah. Anyway, just want to say thank you, anyway, man. Just before I delve into the questions, I appreciate you doing this. It means a lot, man, because I look up to you quite a lot.
My pleasure.
People like yourself, Luca, and other people, John Rusin as well. And just giving time, man, means an awful lot. So thank you.
Well, I love them both. I don't consider myself to be on their level in terms of what they've established and accomplished, but it's good company to keep, that's for sure.
Yeah, for sure, man. I think you'll push yourself to that level anyway, in terms of like where you're going. And, the way you write, I know it's a sidetrack, but the way you write is just so. It's amazing how you can decipher information, right? All right, this is a bit too much maybe, but in terms of James Clear and how he can decipher like the information and put it in such like a different perspective, it's like similar in aspect to, for me anyway, in terms of health and fitness, for people that perhaps may be confused and out of touch with health and fitness. I think the way you decipher complex situations is make it super simple for them.
Yeah, it's one of the most valuable skills you can possess as a fitness professional. And it's why with a lot of my media, I encourage people to learn to write, to learn to edit, to focus on communication skills, because what is our ability to market ourselves, attract clientele, and then develop a relationship and create behavior change in the people we work with, then communication and being able to take the complex and the abstract and give it to them in a way that is relevant to their individual experience and the struggles they're having. So with the writing for the social media stuff, and part of the genius really is using the Twitter format, because you are restricted. Restriction in your resources forces you to be creative. It forces you to be concise. It forces you to choose the best words. It trains you to edit out superfluous language that clutters it up and makes it less accessible to read, right? And then if you create stuff that people go, shit, I know that, I wish I wrote that, that's what gets people to share things. And then when people share things, more people go, I agree with that, I gotta go follow this guy. And then one of the things that I try to convey to people is that's where you also start building and working on the things that go beyond social media, the concrete pieces of career capital. You mentioned Luca. So let's do a little exercise. Like, what does Luca have that he's built in his career? What resources does he have? List them off. There's a lot of them.
Well, as in his own personal self or everything, pretty, because he has a lot of stuff.
Yeah, it is stuff. Like, I mean, and there are things like his former professional basketball career. Okay, so that's a piece of career capital. That's a hard one to replicate, but it's an element. Sure. For the things you turned around and built, created, and worked on, what does he have? Create the list.
The gym, Vigor Ground.
Physical gym, absolutely. That's a big one.
Yeah, Vigor Ground, the summit that he has as well.
His conference, yep.
Yeah,
what else?
Mentorship stuff that he has as well. I haven't obviously done that stuff.
Mentorship, yep, that's a big one.
The coaches he has underneath him that I guess follow systems in the way that they present it as well.
I consider that part of Bigger Ground, but absolutely.
Yeah, like the articles, the content that he writes, social media, obviously Instagram.
Writing's a big one. Long form article writing stuff. That's a huge one.
And the podcast.
What else?
Podcasts.
Podcasts a big one. He's got 2 of them. Yep.
Yeah. The public speaking he does for other people, I guess, as well. Like
presenting, public speaking, absolutely. Like, you're knocking off the list the way I think about it. Absolutely. He's got YouTube. He throws everything up on YouTube as well. YouTube is a type of long form content creation and another vehicle for people. So, there's a few examples. Like John Rusin owns the PPSC. It's presentation, but it's an online educational company, not unlike Renaissance Periodization or Precision Nutrition or, the Online Trainer Academy. I've got John Goodman, who you're probably familiar with. He's got something he's working on. So he's having a bunch of private conversations. So I've got a call with him later this afternoon. He's asked me to give him some feedback on something he's building and working on. Kind of cool. So
I think for you, obviously, like it go back to the writing as well. Like obviously, it takes time, right? Like you didn't just nail that in one go.
No, hell no.
I'm referring to my clients, obviously, in their kind of struggles, their battles, just people in general, right? In terms of the health and fitness, like for you, it's taken years to get to that point where you can really concisely like articulate what you're trying to say And I guess it's similar in that aspect to like our clients, right? It takes them a long time. As much as they want to do it in 3 weeks, 6 weeks, what you see on Men's Health magazine or Women's Health magazine, etc. Yeah, because obviously I guess they're going to be listening to this, right? So I could read off conversations with you in terms of fitness and like the coaching aspect of it. But I guess for them, like, are there like, when people start on their journey, like, are there certain, like, for you, certain like principles, fundamentals that you feel they should maybe, like you said before, like knuckle down on and like, I guess, reduce the fluff of everything else?
So the way I tend to approach this is I think in terms of scope, right? So, I'm not a virologist and I'm not a political science commentator. My role and my job is to teach people how to move well. The skill of proper exercise technique. I'm trying to make them stronger. I want to make sure that they learn it so that they're independent. But if I also overwhelm them with, hey, this is classic precision nutrition stuff, overwhelm with 8 or 9 different lifestyle changes, there's the occasional person that wants to go headlong into that. You have to recognize that the person who goes headlong into it tends to be prone to very extreme on and off behavior. So we also have, managing expectations, behavior change, and dealing with the inevitable, they've fallen off track and everything goes to shit. But with the client in front of me, especially if they're a brand new gym member or someone trying to get back in the habit, it's about developing a great relationship with them. My last client, Neil, he's 70, he's a retiree. He's the other retiree. Everybody sees Larry. Neil's the other guy.
I love Larry, man.
Larry's fantastic. And it's fostering such a good relationship that they love coming to see me and they love the experience by virtue of that. Figuring out, obviously what their physical goals are, teaching them how to move well, developing a love and appreciation for fundamental strength training without the circus bullshit, and building outward from there and layering in the things and the skills that they need. Let's say, both at different junctures, Larry and Neil have struggled at times to, do more activity outside of our workouts, right? Yeah. Going for walks. So Larry got on a really good kick for a while, and then his knees were starting to bug up a little bit, so he slowed it down.
Sure.
Neil had been inactive, despite the fact that I've been operating out of my home facility. Neil was more comfortable following the rules, so he didn't come until he's allowed to. So today was the first day back with him. Okay. And, he'd stated that he'd been fairly inactive, doing a lot of writing, but he hadn't been walking like he normally would want to. But he's getting his bike out, so he's going to go biking. So it's conversations about that sort of stuff that layers in. But it started with making sure that they move well, they feel confident in the gym, confidence in the gym, comfort in the gym. I've taken a new trainer into Evolve. She's a client of mine. She's been a client of mine for, several months. And her company has been going through some really turbulent stuff, is navigating a bankruptcy, whatever. And given the uncertainty, she's like, nah, I'm coming to Evolve. I like it here. But her gym her location was a women's only location. So her women are going from a women's gym to a warehouse, strength training facility. Now it's a great general population facility. There's no mirrors. So there's a lot of angles to, I talked to one of the women today because I take every opportunity to go and say hi to them, greet them. I'm huge. I'm 6'2", 260. And so I can be big and scary looking, but if I come over, I'm friendly, then it helps diffuse some of the fear, because I want all of her clients to come here, feel safe and love it, so she doesn't regret the decision.
Yeah,
There's been some information on the old company. She made the right move and she'll be fine. So I know I'm running a bit of far afield here, but it still boils down to fostering a great relationship with the people I'm working with, the things that they're interested in, and bonding over that. And getting really, really good at the physical fundamentals of movement. Then once those things are going really well, we open up the door to nutrition and we discuss and develop strategies around nutrition. I'm not a registered dietitian, so I don't muck around in meal plans. It's time consuming with add cost. I don't enjoy doing it. I don't like that. But I do love going through what's going on in their nutrition and then discussing behavior change and all of the other stuff around it. So I think that's kind of how I approach it.
Yeah, sure. So you build the base within the gym, you create consistency for us. Like, it's kind of what we preach in our space, right? It's like whatever's going on outside of it doesn't necessarily matter so much right now. You have life, you have like 3, 5, 10, 15 years you need to be fit for, right? Healthy for, and it doesn't happen within 3 to 4 weeks. But you create consistency, you create respect and kind of like trust and confidence within that space. then that kind of fosters fosters a relationship outside of it. And they can start maybe, like you say, stepping into the diet a few weeks later down the line, as they kind of build that base up, as they build that kind of confidence in their foundation, then they start scaling from there. I find it like sometimes tricky as well, because a lot of people, you say meal plans, right? I don't really write meal plans either, but a lot of people want them because they feel like, hey, if you give me a meal plan, I can follow it. It's like, well, let's have a look at this. No, they don't, right? And then I think also, I think it creates that kind of like, as well, I may be wrong, but it kind of creates that kind of like, hey, this is all or nothing. Like, I have to eat this. If I'm off the plan, then perhaps, do you know what I mean? I can't eat the foods that aren't on it. Do you know what I mean?
It creates a dependency upon you. And I don't seek artificial dependency from my clients. And I talk about this with them. I want them to be independent. I want to train myself out of work so that way they can function completely without me. I also want them to be able to do some shit on their own so they get better results. And if they see that, then they value that. That's integrity. And on top of that, you just work on having such a valuable relationship that they want to come back to, and creating so much value in the experience. Otherwise, that you just build in the fact that someone wants to continue in an ongoing relationship with you, which tends to keep you very busy.
Sure.
With the meal plans, you're right. People don't tend to stick to them. There's all sorts of problems with this. And it doesn't create someone who has the independent decision-making ability and the skills to navigate stuff. It just gives them a piece of paper. It's a lot of work on our end. And a lot of people, cheap out on the effort and just, here's like fucking chicken, rice, whatever, instead of getting into a very detailed, nuanced thing, which takes a lot of time in their individual medical history. Now, imagine you got someone who's got, disordered eating behaviors or full-blown eating disorders, or a complicated psychological background in trauma that plays a deep role in their relationship with food. Well, those are directly outside of our scope of practice. Or even, they've got medical health issues like heart disease or diabetes. I mean, if we're prescribing nutrition to treat disease, we're stepping outside of our scope of practice as a personal trainer, if you're not an RD. And you're definitely stepping into troublesome ethical areas and legal areas. Now, I got no problem with working with someone who's got diabetes or heart disease to get them to eat better and get them to choose smart nutritional strategies, eat less food, that's going to impact their health in a positive way. That's totally within play and in bounds. But to actually prescribe the nutrition to treat it, there's a bit of a fine line there, and I just don't step over it.
Yeah, sure. It's what we do as well, to be fair. In terms of, like you said, you find it interesting to look at people's diets. Is there kind of like some common things you find within people's diets and maybe that you feel like you find like common traits across that perhaps could be, I guess, improved on in the future?
I look for certain types of behavior. What are the behaviors that underlie the problems? Do we have people who fall apart on the weekends? Do we have snackers? Do we have people who, binge on high calorie food in the evenings after a tough day? What kind of planning? What kind of food environment? What kind of thinking ahead can we train these people to do? I got a guy now. If he eats breakfast and early in the day, he doesn't want to snack in the evenings. If he doesn't do that, he snacks in the evenings. He's realized that. He's the one who says this. So he's very prone to extreme, hardcore, addict, aggressive behavior and stuff, or completely falling off the wagon. He's a little newer to me, but I'm working with him. Another important thing whenever you deal with something like that is to create an environment where they don't feel like you're judging them if they're struggling.
That's huge.
Because if you're not judgmental and you're supportive and you encourage them to forgive themselves, they're going to feel a lot more comfortable in letting you know what's really going on, versus the clients that are off track. They're not responding to texts, and you're like, I know what's going on here, right?
I find as well. No, I find as well. Like so some people, obviously, with myself or whoever, like have had trainers before. They'll message the plan and say, "Hey, don't judge me. But I'm like, I'm not going to judge you. But maybe they've had that experience before and I guess they perhaps see us as people that are, I guess, into the fitness, into that kind of like nutrition, that mindset where we don't fall off this. Do you mean don't fall off the bandwagon? We're like so on it that we seem such a distant part. And I guess part of your point is creating that relationship right at the very start, which helps reduce that kind of anxiety that people have.
no matter how many good people you follow who say the kind of things that I know I say about non-judgment with their media, the people that we work with see a lot of individuals that they equate with the fitness industry that we kind of know aren't, the fitness influencer types. And I spend very little time complaining about them, but we acknowledge what they are. Your Insta models who, sell coaching, but it's all just cookie cutter plans where they just like send everybody the same bullshit. They charge whatever they charge for it. They do very little work. Those people exist. There's also an enormous amount of media from people who are into fitness who may or may not themselves be part of the fitness industry, but people don't understand those distinctions. Plus the mainstream media, which do have a judgmental message. So people are going to come in unless they really know us and assume that's kind of just how it is. Yeah. And they've seen judgment and they've seen shame in all corners, especially if they've struggled with their weight and their behavior and consistency. So yeah, it is on us to demonstrate proactively and empathetically that we are a safe environment to have those conversations. And then we have to be very careful and thoughtful about what we say in everything that we say about, even if we're talking about, stuff that we've seen on social media, our own thoughts or opinions. And if we tell them, hey, we're not judgmental, but then we say something very judgmental about somebody or something else in a different context, that's going to set up warning flares. So it's about walking the walk and practicing what you preach in all those regards.
Sure. I think I was having a chat with the client yesterday actually about this because her previous coach had written something quite aggressive on on Instagram post about not wanting to train anyone anymore because they don't. He's fed up of not everyone waking up at 5 a.m. like he does. If they want to kind of get fit, get in shape, etc. And so she was like, "You're not gonna be like that, are you? You're not this guy." I was like, "Hey, like that's not me at all." But as you say, right?
He's exactly what I'm talking about, right? The fact that these people do this. Or I see this from the bodybuilding coaches, the prep coaches who train bikini girls all the time. There's always this bullshit Facebook post. If you don't, do your check-ins on time, and if you don't eat your food, blah, blah, and if you don't do this, well, it's your fault. It's not your coach's fault. I gave you the plan and bullshit. You're not a coach. Being a coach is meeting people where they're at, helping work with them through the life challenges that don't make any coach that thinks that adherence is automatic and 100% is completely delusional. Or they're out to lunch, right?
Yeah, sure.
In fact, I want to write a note about that down because that might actually make for something good to write about.
No worries. I guess a lot of it as well is the language in people's mind and the conversation they have within their head and their own identity. Because a lot of the times as well, like it's not just training, right? It's not someone wants to get in shape and maybe they hire yourself, they go to like a fitness gym as such, and they understand the process need to happen, as you say. But a lot of the time it's the language they use in their mind that potentially like blocks them from going forward, right? It's kind of like saying that, do you know what I mean? Like if you saw two smokers, like I always reference it, and someone says, "Hey, I've quit," the other one says, "I'm trying to quit." The one trying to quit hasn't created identity yet to kind of like try and become that new person, right?
Oh, you hit on something big there, and I write about this sometimes, is identity. You're right. If you help people foster an identity as someone who's a fit person, and there's something very specific to smoking. I think there's been studies on this. People who think of themselves as non-smokers, who are past smokers, but they think of themselves as non-smokers, are less likely to return to smoking than people who think of themselves as ex-smokers. And funny enough, I don't know if this has been researched in alcoholics, but I think it flies in the face of a lot of the things that are taught to alcoholics during like AA. I mean, AA seems to have somewhat of a track record of working, but I don't think it's based in anything really scientific. In fact, I think that's sort of the thing that people say it isn't particularly scientific. And I'm inclined to believe that if someone thinks of themselves as, I'm not a drinker versus I'm an ex-alcoholic. And I know the rationale behind, well, I'm an ex-alcoholic because, alcohol is so problematic and dangerous for me that I have to be constantly on guard. I get that, but that's also kind of exhausting a little bit. I suppose ultimately it's whatever works for you, but I agree with you entirely. I think a lot of what we do in order to get people to success is to help them aspire to identities that they want to get to. You know, if someone definitely, good example of how I kind of think about this. I do work with some police applicants, police recruits, right? I have a formal pipeline to the local Edmonton Police Service. And I find I get two types of people. You know, these young, fit, active people who are really determined that they want to become police officers. And I find that they're living the identity of it already. And there's a second tier, and they tend to, on average, be far less in shape, dramatically so. Often older, but that's not necessarily a key part of it. And they almost have this attitude that they want to get into policing, but once they get into policing, then they'll start with better fitness, better eating, all this sort of stuff, right? So they don't have a strong identity within the behaviors that they need to have to live the lifestyle of a police officer. The first group always crush the physicals. Policing's capricious. They don't always necessarily get through for God only knows what kind of weird reasons.
Sure.
Our city is particularly bad for this shit. But the second group, they never ever get through. They never get very far in the process. They certainly never get past the physicals or much beyond them. And they aren't willing to put in the effort necessary to train to complete these physicals and crush these physicals, right?
Is that part of like sometimes that's identity, right? But sometimes that's like it's not also that. It's self-belief, self-doubt, maybe in that aspect as well. I'm thinking maybe if I go full in and fail, like sometimes, right? If I go full in and fail, then like that's on me. But if I don't give it my all, then it's not necessarily my fault that I haven't done it because I haven't really pushed myself that far to get there.
Fixed versus growth mindset. Have you read Carol Dweck's book, Mindset?
I haven't, no.
It's all about that. All about that.
Is it? I'll write down.
Yeah, Carol Dweck, D-W-E-C-K, book Mindset. And it goes into great detail. It uses a lot of examples, but two notable ones. Do you remember John McEnroe, the tennis player?
Yeah.
And you certainly know, right. And you certainly know Michael Jordan. Now, you've heard the tales of how Michael Jordan was cut from his, I think he was high school basketball team, worked hard at it, got in there. He wasn't nobody for North Carolina. University of North Carolina scored 30 points under Dean Smith. But Jordan again did great there. He lost in the playoffs to the Detroit Pistons, who had the Jordan rules early in his career. And what did Jordan always do through this? Got better and better and better and better, to the point where he's arguably the best basketball player to ever live. One of the most dominant. And I watched him a lot growing up as a kid. He was unbelievable because he always wanted to be better than his competition. And he used the challenges along the way to motivate him to work harder to get better. So that's growth mindset at its very essence. Whereas someone like McEnroe, naturally gifted, talented, sure. And certainly, a legendary tennis player. But whenever something went wrong, what did he do? He threw temper tantrums. He smashed his racket. He blamed officials. I don't particularly recall Michael Jordan spending a lot of time in the media blaming the officials, right? He just went out and got shit done or got better to the point where he could beat everybody else. And they use these examples as someone with very fixed mindset will often avoid challenges that expose their lack of capability. They have this belief, they've been told how great they are, but they don't do well in situations where their greatness is tested. And they're not motivated to work harder to get better so that way they can overcome those challenges, right? And again, McEnroe makes a fairly good example. He's still a great tennis player and he's still very entertaining. But yeah, and he also just had a bad temper.
How can someone maybe identify whether they are like a growth or fixed mindset? How can you it's a hard question, right? But how can you transition across? Or what are there some steps that you, I guess, maybe give your clients or give, I guess, ideas to people to kind of like open up that kind of different thought process or challenge their belief systems as such?
I don't know if I've ever really thought very in depth about it. I think if you noticed All right. So one thing I do when I notice language that is self-defeating, negative self-talk, right? This is probably the most common example of this, where people use language to say, and especially if it's shame-based language. So if you read any of Brene Brown's work, great stuff on this, it helps understand it. When you see language like guilt would be, well, shit, all right, I did a bad thing there, I fucked that up, okay. And then shame is, I'm a bad person and I'm incapable of doing better. So when you notice that kind of language, shame-based language, you call it out in a very subtle way. You bring attention to it without making the person feel ashamed of it. You say, you're not going to change this style of thinking in one shot, but if you can train yourself to recognize when you're saying these mean things about yourself, and I know where these things come from, we say them about ourselves as armor to deflect someone else from saying it. But if you can get people to realize how damaging it is to constantly say it to yourself, and it's far more detrimental than the rare occurrences where someone else might say you're fat or you're ugly, then you can start to get people to recognize when they say it, which may reduce the frequency of them saying it, and they're more aware of that behavior.
Yeah, sure.
And if they're willing to change and they want to be happier, then we can start to at least open the door to conditioning them to think differently. Or at least if they're not yet thinking differently, the things we say affect us powerfully. So if we say negative things about ourselves, our body doesn't distinguish between you yourself saying it versus someone else saying it. And so if you're constantly saying this over time, which people, probably some exes who use a lot of that kind of language, certainly clients. And if you can just get them to be a bit more aware of it, sorry, some background noise, right, then you're on the road to at least moving people along that path. Yeah. Someone who's truly stuck in a fixed mindset, they're tough, but I don't know if we necessarily get to work with a lot of those type of people.
Yeah, sure.
But I don't think of it as a black and white dichotomy. I think of it as a spectrum of stuff.
Sure.
But if people, here's another big part of it. You're just showing them that they're getting stronger. If someone wants to lose weight, okay, and their identity is tied to their weight, that's challenging. But if we can also get them to notice that you're squatting heavier, you're deadlifting heavier, something that's very, very hard to fake. And they notice, wait a second, I'm seeing results, I'm seeing change because of my effort. Then they start to believe that they are in control of their outcome, which is important. And they start believing that, then that reinforces a growth mindset where they know that the effort becomes worth it.
I think on top of that as well, transition into it, like progress as well, because a lot of people, I guess, have progress attached to weight on the scale, like especially whether it goes up, goes down, like whatever. For yourself, like what else like measurable markers that people can use instead of the weight for progress as well? Because I guess for you, like you said, for me as well, and I guess for most coaches, it's like, let's take you away from the scale. Let's focus on other aspects of strength, of like, fitness, whatever it may be, habits that you've developed, maybe routines that you've created. Are there certain kind of progress things that you kind of like focus on yourself for your clients rather than obviously weight and stuff like that?
Strength. Without question, performance and strength on the things that we're doing. Right? And it's something you're constantly measuring, not in terms of 1 rep maxes much, but hey, you squatted 135 for 6 last time. You couldn't have got the 7th rep. 2 weeks later, we're doing 155 for 8. I can't fake that. It's the same depth. You're doing awesome, right? This weight that wouldn't come off the floor in a deadlift, before, you've now done it for 2 reps. So, it's progress. It's demonstrable progress. I had another thought there too. I just want to try to resurface it. Oh, and behaviors, right? It's classic behavior versus outcome goal stuff. I've posted stuff about this before, where, and it always plays really well when I do. If you can get people to look at their success and adherence with showing up to a certain number of workouts a month, or certain things relating to their nutrition or their cardio efforts, and if they can focus on success with the behaviors, tends to lead to the outcomes they're looking for. But I still focus on the success with completing the behavior. And then once they realize that consistency with this behavior leads to the outcome they desire, be it fat loss, then they're more likely to engage in the behavior and not fixate on whether or not they're achieving the outcome or the pace at which they're getting to that outcome.
Yeah, sure. I think so. I've done like a Brian King course. He talks like microscope and telescope goals. Telescope being obviously the bigger picture of the outcome, right? And then you have the microscope goals, ones that maybe you do daily and weekly, and the habits and the practice that get you to that. And I think, like you say, focusing your attention perhaps on that and really understanding. Sweet, like for us with COVID especially, right? How many people worked out during COVID? Like probably not many for a period of time, and then some people wanting, like you mentioned earlier, right? Understanding reality, and also like where they're at, meeting where they're at, like the capabilities. Like going from nothing in COVID to going to at least like 2 sessions a week is a great place to start, right? For sure, they may have wanted 4, but like let's meet you where you're at. Let's understand expectations. 2 can always become 4 in the future, right? But it's a lot easier to scale up than it is to scale backwards, mentally as well. I think that's a big thing itself. You mentioned like earlier, right? I know I'm going back, but you mentioned about like, I think one big thing as well I see a lot of times is the weekends. We're lifting up a lockdown now, obviously in the UK. I'm not sure what it's like in Canada. And so well, we're supposedly meant to be, but weekends are always a big struggle for a lot of people. There's certain things that I guess we do in terms of saying that, hey, can we manage Monday to Friday and understand the intake? If we are going to plan and prioritize and maybe prepare, I guess, be proactive for the weekend. Are there certain like strategies or habits that you, I guess, would recommend for people to manage your intake on a weekend, maybe a little bit more so where it's a little bit like looser because there's less routine and less structure?
It becomes getting people to anticipate where they tend to get into trouble and planning strategies, planning how they're going to navigate certain things, right? Let's say, okay, I'm going to a birthday party, there's going to be cake. And then one, it's sometimes it's giving them permission to say, listen, you can have a piece of cake. That's fine, right? And you can tie it back to, and it's not conditional on whether you're good during the week. Careful about language like that. But if you're able to just really stay on track with your nutrition during the week, then you should be able to guilt-free enjoy that piece of cake, in a social gathering. And then sort of work with them to make decisions ahead of time and say, decide that the piece of cake is going to be small, and that, if there's going to be drinks, well, you either you decide you're just not going to drink, or you pick something that's low calorie and you have a certain limit. Setting limits on drinks is always tricky. You got to know your client's relationship with alcohol too. Right? That's a tough one. That can get really complex.
I think as well, but, I was just saying, like with the PN stuff you mentioned earlier, I think that's a big thing that I've kind of taken away from doing that course is understanding deep health. And sometimes, like, you're not going to be perfect, but health isn't always physical. It can be emotional, social, relational as well, right? And so sometimes that glass of wine on the weekend, whatever, like, sure, that may not be hitting your physical demands of what you want, but socially, relational, that's also a huge part of your own health, right? And especially with COVID and the way that's kind of gone and the lack of. So sometimes, for sure. Anyway, I think like maybe it's not a case of really being dialed in with your nutrition on the weekend and really understanding. Okay, you said you go for 2, but you went for 4 glasses of wine. Okay, like that's honestly fine. Like, how was your time? Like, how did you have a good time? Did you catch up with your friends? Did you have that kind of like social connection that you maybe lacked for a period of time? And also creating awareness around that situation as well is especially important now. We haven't seen anyone for 18 months.
Another really important thing is to condition people to recognize when they are giving themselves permission and making them realize that they are absolutely making excuses and giving themselves permission to go into fuck it mode. So they say, oh, I've blown it, and I might as well just do whatever. And it's really just an excuse to not be disciplined and to not take ownership of the whole thing. You gotta be careful how you use that language with them, but if you got a good relationship with people, you can kind of call them on their shit sometimes.
Yeah.
And if I can get someone to lessen the frequency, severity, and the duration of weekend binge behaviors, and if I can coax them to say, all right, Friday evening got a little out of hand after work, you had some drinks and whatever, you got in some whatever food. All right, so wake up on Saturday and have a good, a solid breakfast, and then get that day started good. Don't just let the whole weekend go, and get them to realize that's an option and an important one. And if they catch themselves Saturday lunch got out of hand. Okay, cool. Make dinner a good one, right? Don't make it an excuse to just throw the weekend away. And if I especially get people who use language like, I'll reset on Monday, that one's a bit of a red flag for me. It's a big one, right? When I see that kind of language, I do work on trying to break that thinking and just call their attention and say, well, when we're saying we're going to reset on Monday, we're giving ourselves permission to just eat whatever, do whatever, Saturday, Sunday. And that's where a lot of the damage is occurring. And then you tie it back into, what are their goals and what is the emotional reasoning underlying their desire to change their lives, right? And sometimes it's just tying it back to, you got a purpose greater than yourself, like look at your kids, right? You're trying to set a healthier example for your kids and you want to be healthy so you're around for them. And you got to have a good relationship to kind of poke that button as well, or at least know how to.
Yeah.
But, there's not necessarily a straightforward process. It's just,
sure.
If you're aware of these things, I find that you can then work with each individual to find ways to, and make sure that they understand it's not a pass, fail, good, bad. It's a gradual improvement. And again, lessening, like I said, that frequency, that severity, that duration of these incidents is progress going forward. And so that way they can forgive themselves and not feel ashamed if they falter along the way, because shame will derail them completely.
Yeah, sure. I think like James Clear mentioned in his book, it's like one's a mistake, but two becomes a habit, as you say. Yeah. Like it's sweet. Like obviously Friday evening may have happened. But as you say, the next morning is like sweet. That's when we can pick things back up again. We can just carry on as normal, right? And understand the process. Maybe, like you say, create more awareness about the evening and what happened, what led into it, etc. Understanding that and then processing that, dealing with it, and then moving on without that kind of like mental residue left there. Do you know what I mean? That lingers over the weekend.
Sure. Yeah.
Sweet, man. Well, I think to be fair, I think I'll leave it there. If that's all right with you, that was a really good way to finish, man. If that's cool with you.
Absolutely.
Again, man, thank you so much for jumping in.
My pleasure.
Conversation.
You didn't have any no other questions about anything?
Dude, I've probably got so many about coaching, stuff like that, understanding that, writing. Actually, if you don't mind, so like in terms of like your own writing, your own skills, how did you start developing that? I guess is that just through like maybe mentors that you had, or like studying other people's writing? Like what kind of got you into it, I guess?
Neither of those formally. There's definitely some people I've read over the years. I mean, the aggregation of what you read affects your writing. So I like reading a lot, especially now more than ever. Reading books about writing is one of the best things you can do. The book On Writing Well by Zinzer, I waved that around. Recently, a couple people have tagged me in a book I've recommended called Write Tight. Yeah. Luca Hocevar, actually, I messaged him and I was like, yeah. And so Luca went and he's like, hey, I recommended it to him. And so he was happy. Luca and I do this thing where if we come across a really great book, we'll message each other and be like, here, have you read this yet? He's been waving around your next 5 moves. So that was something I put him onto, and he really liked that one as well. So, and then I've grabbed, God, I can't count the number of good books over the years from him sharing stuff. So books on writing. There's a guy named Roy Peter Clark. He's got a whole bunch of really good books. How to Write Short is something I read recently. So I've been writing the Twitter stuff for a long time, but it reinforces a lot of things there. That's a good one. There's a handful of other books.
What decided you? What made you go down the route of being that kind of like, I guess, like writer? Because obviously you've been a personal trainer, right? Like what kind of got you into the thought, actually, do you know what, I wouldn't mind writing and exploring that kind of a bit more?
Well, it kind of goes back to this identity thing. I mean, I used to think, reading T Nation, 10, 11 years ago when I started my career, that, there's this like tier of like super elite trainers that are all like a network. And then there's like everybody else who's just a trainer on the floor. And through my travels, I've gone to a lot of fitness conferences over the year. In 2017, I met James Clear. He happened to be at a fitness conference. He's a really nice guy, just before he even wrote Atomic Habits, Small World. And I've met John Russin and Luca and Brett Contreras. I've hung out one-on-one with Brett Contreras. I've hung out one-on-one with Sohee Lee, Spencer Nadolski, Eric Helms, Mike Isertel several times down to dinner in a very small group. Mike and I are good pals. Lee Boyce is a very good friend. Tony Gentilcourt, Dean Somerset's here locally. I've known him for years. Jonathan Goodman, and this list goes on and fucking on. And there's just one of those weird things that's happened. I am pretty tight with people I haven't met in person, but the podcast has helped me foster those relationships with people like Jordan Syed or Matthew Ibrahim, Gareth Sapstead, again, on and on. We drop names all day. And those connections led to some cool opportunities. The podcast was a big part of it. And Danny Sugart eventually asked me to come and write for T Nation over 2.5 years ago. So that opened that door. And then my relationship with Jonathan Goodman led to an article for the PTDC. I've got to get his editor some more ideas. And he's connected me up with, because of my track record of writing and how I've studied and worked hard at it, he connected me up with bodybuilding.com, which is not yet officially published. Their publishing is undergoing some changes. So we're just waiting for my article to be published. And then Generation Iron just reaches out to me, probably due to my T Nation background, and like, hey, would you come write for us? I'm like, all right, sure. We talked about it. It's happening, right? So and there'll be more. There'll be more in the future. But a lot of it started with me just getting in the habit of doing like blog style fitness writing on Facebook, and doing that over the years, getting better and better at writing just naturally, and then studying it with books because I was hungry to learn more about being a good writer. And then the connections that I had created through the industry, just organically talking to people, the podcast, whatever, without any intention of leveraging it. And all of a sudden, Mike Isertel is sharing my posts on his wall, and Jonathan Goodman is sharing my stuff, and all over the place. Meanwhile, I also approach this with a very abundant mindset of sharing everybody else's stuff as much as possible, because these are the people I think trainers will benefit from learning from, because I can't do it all. I can't create everything under the sun. If someone wants to, I'll show you lots of stuff that I do at Larry, but my friend Robert Linkle has formal online coursework about training older adults, right? Or, if you want to get deeper into really being a skilled writer, John Romanello is a very, very accomplished writer. Now, John, interesting character. There's some goofy stuff there, but sure, I can teach so much about glute training, but Brett Contreras literally has a PhD in it, and books and you name it. So there's all these resources. So I know who all these resources are. So if I can share these resources with people, then it takes the pressure off me to try to I coach 40, 50 hours a week sometimes.
Yeah.
I don't have time to write 4 or 5 articles a week. I'm lucky if I get 2 articles done a month, right? So
I was going to say to you, how do you find the space? Also, space more, right? To really develop deep work, because when you write an article, right, it's not just like something you can write and fly whilst checking Facebook and Instagram and doing things. You have to really get into the mindset of it, right, and really understand and put your thoughts onto the paper and leave your head there.
Time blocking and just getting started. You got to open the computer, just get it open in front of you, and you start mashing keys, and then things just manifest from there. There's a couple of good books that help people work through procrastination or the struggles to get started. And they're both short books. Stephen Pressfield's The War of Art. Yeah, that's a classic. Yeah, it's great. And it's an easy reread. Sometimes it just needs a refresher. And then Seth Godin's The Practice, which was my top book of 2020. I always put a book list on Facebook of everything I've read, and I break it down to categories of like, my top 5 must reads, recommended, stuff, and then like, don't waste your time, this shit's crap, right? So
in terms of because you started personal, am I right in you didn't start personal, right? You started a little bit later than some people. You didn't start right from school, from university, you didn't go straight into
I've been an fitness enthusiast. I mean, I played sports growing up, fitness enthusiast for a lot of my younger adult life, but I actually fell into personal training at 32. I'm 43 now, so it's been almost 11 years doing it. And yeah, I feel like I was a late starter in one regard, but it's been something I've really loved ever since. And I feel in terms of like my attitude and energy in life as a much younger person. But yeah, I was a little bit late starter, and I have to play catch up. So my formal education is in business. I've got a Bachelor of Commerce degree. I don't, I read and study and learn as everything I fucking can, which probably adds up to the equivalent of a master's degree in personal training, but I don't have the formal credentials, nor do I care, because over 10 and a half years, every person that's ever sat in front of me, everybody asks what your rates are. I recall one person who asked what your education is.
And so many coaches focus on the certifications, so you can ask the be all end all.
Yeah. I don't chase certifications. I mean, I have something planned. I've got a couple I'm going to work on coming up. One, because something was offered to me as a beta test that's like a NDA, can't talk about it. And then the second one, I actually do want to go and do the NSCA, stuff, just because I've been diving more and more into strength conditioning.
Yeah.
I got time for one more quick question, then I got to go.
Sweet, man. Thank you. Just quickly, I have some coach underneath me, right? That may be newish to the industry. Is there any advice you'd give them in terms of starting developing their own kind of like personal development themselves, and I guess finding a path within the industry?
Documenting what they're doing, I think, is a really good one. I've got an article that might be helpful here. Let me find it. You may have read this along the way, but I'm going to send it to you. I would actually give this article to all your coaches. Where are you? There you go. Good. There's a second article linked in it, but the link is broken because my friend has a website down, but I'm going to republish the second article on my own website. I'm currently having it revamped, but that's going to take a little time, so I apologize for that. But either way, the one I just sent you,
I'll hold on.
It does speak to newer trainers, people who haven't been around as long or haven't got as much of a following, feeling like, well, they don't have the right to go and create and share ideas. Start sharing, start writing, start doing it now. Start doing it when there's a lot less eyes on you, so that way, by the time you've accumulated a little more following and traction, you've had to practice. It is about practicing and getting good at these skills, sucking at it to start with, and being unapologetic about it, and just doing it. There's no magic formula. People have to gain the experience. It's no different than gaining experience coaching people as a trainer. It's just now applying that to their brand, their media, their social media.
Yeah, sure. That imposter syndrome, you mentioned with Hannah Gray, right, on your podcast with her, and going through that, I think that's perhaps where they're at, right? And I think, like you say, going through it right now is a great way to do it before they get, I guess, bigger following or more people looking at or more attention, for sure.
Hannah's a close friend. She's been doing this shit for, I think, 16 years or more. She's here in Edmonton, and she's mentored under and been trained by Dean Somerset for half of her career. And while she's an incredible and capable person, she still has imposter syndrome. These coaches are going to have imposter syndrome for a really long time. You just have to cut through it. You just have to keep working at it. And people treat me in a weird way, all the writing, whatever. But just because my social media grew, all of a sudden people put you in a different place. So that's kind of weird, right?
Yeah, sure. I think my clients.
So, and then,
yeah. Go on.
I was going to say, you know what? Yeah. So people have this idea that once you've got more size to your social media, that you're somehow like this expert or you have credibility. And people have that perception, but it's not exactly the truth. So it's not even close. I'd better go and prep for my next guy coming in. Thank you, Sam, this has been great. I hope it's been beneficial. And
very much too. Just quickly, where like people listening to this, like obviously we spoke a lot about your kind of like your writing and that. Where can they kind of like read it or digest it? The podcast, Instagram handle.
Let's see. All roads go through Instagram. So Instagram is at Andrew Coates Fitness. Sorry, just having a brain freeze there.
That's so good. Thanks, man. Again, I really appreciate the time. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
Have an awesome afternoon, man. Enjoy it.
You too. Take care.
Thank you, man. Bye-bye.